Growing up, I can remember being a sixth grader and kind of hitting this point where I felt like if I was going to be a real Christian, I needed to read an entire book of the Bible on my own without being told I had to do it because of a Bible study or church or anything. So I decided to open up a book I hadn't read a whole lot of and just kind of go through it and see what that spoke to me. And the book that I chose, of all the books I could have chosen, was Ecclesiastes for some reason. And there was something I loved about it so much. It didn't sugarcoat things. It didn't try to tell me that the world was going to be great and awesome all the time. Instead, it boiled everything down to what I think is actually a very simple message, which is this. Guess what? Life kind of sucks. But the good news is at the end of the day, you get to die. Isn't that like an optimistic phrase? You could almost just kind of end it right there. So thanks for joining us. No, I'm just kidding. Can you imagine? It bears a little bit of explaining, but there is something that's actually very refreshing. I mean, if you think about so much of Christianity tries to tell us that, things are going to be awesome and it's great and we're all like lovey-dovey and we're all about the love and acceptance and compassion and unity and all the good things that we like about Christianity. And yes, Christ was definitely about all those things. But there's also something to be said for being very realistic about the world around us. Some might call it cynical. Some might just say it's being observant and being, again, realistic about the things in the world around us. To me, what was maybe the most shocking about this book was, even though I was reading something that took place so many years and so many generations in the past, how much of it was so relevant to our world today. When you go and you actually start reading through little bits and pieces of this in your own little group, you're going to start out in Ecclesiastes 1:9, and you're going to see this little phrase that you've probably heard before, which is there's nothing new under the sun. Something that I would challenge you to do is in your groups, for one moment, just think about all the different things that we in the here and now in 21st century Western world America, think of all the different things that people have to deal with. And then what I would challenge you is to try to ask yourself, is there really anything in there that you can figure out that isn't in some way, shape, or form just really a part of the basic human condition, things people have been dealing with for thousands of years? And taking that one step further, is there anything you can think about that we have to deal with that in some way, shape, or form isn't actually kind of addressed when it comes to the Bible? Now, I am very interested to hear if you guys came up with anything. And even though I'm sure that there are some things that we deal with today that they didn't deal with 2,000 years ago. I mean, 2,000 years ago, they didn't understand what a computer, what a camera would be. I mean, they didn't understand these things. So I'm just sure that there are versions of things that are different. But the same basic human traits have been the same throughout generations and generations. We all want to be loved. We all want to be successful. We all want to be viewed a certain way amongst our peers. These are things that we all deal with, and they're very human in nature. But what Solomon is trying to point out in this book of Ecclesiastes is that pursuit of these things to find joy, to find satisfaction, to find fulfillment is ultimately going to fall flat. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Last week we talked a lot about, how we are not trying to achieve the same trophy that the world is trying to achieve, because the world is trying to achieve a trophy that is of the world. It wants to, conquer society. It wants to, run the government. It wants to get worldly, earthly fame. But all those things are going to disappear with our society, with our own history, with our world. As soon as everything that we see and we can touch is gone, it doesn't really matter if we achieved all that, but the trophy we're after is something bigger, right? Solomon is saying something fundamentally the exact same. As long as we try to find our fulfillment, our sense of satisfaction in things that are as temporary as this world, it means as soon as the world is gone, whether it's because the world is gone or because we are gone from the world, it means that all those pursuits were for nothing. But there's a good side to this, because you see, when we really take stock of the fact that our sense of joy and satisfaction and belonging and our sense of value is not dependent on how this world sees us, that can actually be very relieving, because all of a sudden I don't have to worry about being the best at work. I don't have to worry about being the wealthiest. I don't have to worry about being the most famous person out there, the smartest, or whatever other thing the world would want to pursue. It doesn't matter, because ultimately I'm not trying to prove to the world how good I am, because God has in effect already defined my value. And he did that when he sent his son to die on a cross for you and for me. Now, one of the things I think is really interesting there is, if you notice, that Solomon's not really trying to say that any of these things is in and of themselves bad. He's not trying to say they're always terrible. He's also not saying that they're always good. He's just saying that they go through these phases of, being good. You can enjoy the fruits of your labor, but then they also go through, different times of being bad. He talks about your work being turned over to somebody else who's just going to go and, waste it away. So what do we do with this? What do we take away from this? Well, it's not that things are necessarily good or bad. It's that God has a time that he ordains for many things to be good and bad. You may be familiar with this section that actually comes out of Ecclesiastes, even though maybe you didn't know that's where it came from, where Solomon says that there's a season for all things. And in a second, you'll go and you'll read through what all these different things are. But what you'll see is that basically there's a time for good and there's a time for bad. And these things happen in a way that God ordains them. So what do we do with that? Well, simply put, we just have to let go. We have to learn to be content with where we find ourselves. We're so obsessed with controlling the world around us and controlling our good circumstances and our bad circumstances that sometimes the hardest goal for any of us to be able to achieve is to just be content with what we have and with where we are. But you see, if we could reach that state of contentment, then there's something really interesting there. Because you see, when we're content in the Lord, then what that means is that we can roll with the goods and the bads as God presents them to us. And when God wants to use us in a certain place to reach a certain people or to address certain problems that he sees or to work in other people's lives, then we are enabled to be able to deal with those highs and with the lows. This is what it means to say that through Christ, I can do all things. It's not necessarily because I'm self-empowered or because God gives me supernatural might. It's because when I learn to roll with the goods and with the bads, then all of a sudden, how good and how bad a situation is irrelevant. Because all I'm doing is being content with the good that God has put in my life, and yes, with the bads and with the challenges that God has put in my life. And regardless of which season I find myself in, I'm going to go through it with a sense of inner satisfaction and inner joy, because I know I'm doing it with the Lord. I hate to say it, but it is true. Sometimes life sucks and then we're going to die. But at the same time, sometimes life's not going to suck. Sometimes it's going to be awesome. Sometimes we're going to have highs. Today you might be at a high, you might be at a low. You might be somewhere in the middle. No matter where you're at, understand that this is a place that God has placed you, and it's an opportunity to be able to demonstrate your devotion to God, but also to be able to be strengthened in Him, to be able to see the world and to see your circumstances through a different lens. Instead of looking at everything around you and trying to say, am I good enough? Am I doing enough? Am I achieving enough? Instead, you get to look around you and say, my value as an individual and the value of the people around me is not defined by those same worldly measures that everybody else wants to try to measure them by. No, instead, my value is defined by the fact that, once again, if I haven't said it enough, God sent His Son to die on a cross for you and for me. And if He could do it all over again to save us even more, He would. That's how our value is defined. So the thing is that compared to that, what is it that we think we're going to achieve? What kind of extra value or satisfaction do we think we're going to be able to earn in this world? There's nothing better. There's nothing higher that we're going to be able to do. So all we're really left with is then to look at the situations we find ourselves in and to say, you know what? I don't know why God has put me in this place. I don't know why God has decided to bless me with the things I have. I don't know why God is deciding to challenge me and to let me go through this trial right now. But for whatever it is, I know that there is a reason. And for that reason, instead of trying to fight the reality I find myself in, I'm going to be content. And hopefully in that state and that mentality of being content, emotionally and spiritually, I can be strengthened and be able to rise up to any occasion that I'm called to rise up to. Once again, thank you so much for joining me. And until we can meet next time, God bless.